Hi, it's Pastor Jennifer, and I'm here at Kelly Island at the confluence of the Clark Fork and Bitterroot Rivers. Sacred ground for certain. Please join me in a moment of prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, and may more light and more truth break forth from your holy ground. Amen. Now, this is part 2 of a series that we're exploring through the Easter season about Earth, our original monastery. Last week, Laura talked to us about oceans and how they reveal the presence and nature of God, and this week I get to do the same with rivers. And because I'm a flat water kayaker and a Good morning, everyone. It's Pastor Jennifer. I'm on Kelly Island at the confluence of the Bitterroot and Clark Fork Rivers, continuing our series on the Earth as our sacred monastery. Please join me in a moment of prayer. May the words of my mouth and meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, and may more light and more truth break forth from your holy ground. Now, I am so grateful to get part 2 of this series on Earth, our original monastery, because I love rivers. And there are a couple of images of rivers that I wanted to share with you that continue to reveal God's nature to me. The first is that when you look at a map of a watershed and you can see the rivers and the creeks and the streams and the lakes that are there, it reminds me very much of looking at a map of human veins and arteries, or looking at a leaf with its veins and capillaries, and how the goodness and the nurture of light and of sun and of water itself are carried through our landscapes. Several years ago, I worked for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and the Environmental Protection Agency. And what I learned is that while some operate under a principle that the solution to pollution is dilution, it works sometimes, but generally speaking, anything we put at a river at one point winds up further downriver. And from an environmental perspective, it becomes essential to be very mindful of what we discharge into our rivers and to keep our river banks strong through planting trees and other storage, through planting trees and other restoration efforts. So looking at rivers as the veins and arteries of our community becomes really essential. Now, the second image that I love about rivers is this idea of the river of time. It's Heraclitus who said you can never step into the same river twice. And that's true on 2 grounds. First is that the rivers are constantly changing. This river, a week from now, will look very different, likely to have a lot more water in it, and so the water itself will move faster. That will submerge some dangers and reveal others. Whereas 2 months from now, when the water level is likely to be a lot lower, other dangers will be submerged and others emerge. And so looking at the one river suggests that it is never the same. So too our spiritual relationship with God, sometimes rich and full in flood and flowing, other times down to a trickle. Doesn't mean that the river isn't still there. It just means that there might be more effort or more spaciousness or more patience to just appreciate the river as it is, in flood or in famine. The next idea about rivers that I think is so powerful comes to us from the book of Amos, where there's a prayer that justice would flow like a river and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. This week, Derek Chauvin's trial concluded, and it could be that by the time worship happens on Sunday morning, a verdict has already been delivered. Now, to the family and the community of George Floyd, this verdict could be very significant, but it is just an indictment of a larger system that needs more love to flow through its banks. It needs more justice to flow through its banks. That needs more of our attention and our love to reform and reshape the landscape that we live in, just like this river does, to bring more justice to people who have been denied justice for so long. The other idea that the river brings to mind is that rivers are places of healing. That's definitely in my case. We know that from a physiological perspective, rivers release negative ions that have an effect on our bodies that create a greater sense of peace and ease. That the sound of rivers, for many people, not all, but the sound of rivers flowing creates a sense of gentleness and release. Rivers, as they are sources of healing, refresh the roots of the trees and of the ecosystems around them, but they also are a reminder that what's really key for us is to be able to find ways to let go in our lives, to let go of angers and grudges and griefs, to let go of unmet expectations, to let go of fear, to let go of desire itself. That from source to sea, the river can remind us that we are constantly on a journey of new opportunity to let go and to let God flow through. Finally, the image that I take from the gospel story of Jesus being baptized in the River Jordan, of rising up out of that river and having the dove speak to him, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." We ourselves are coming out of the pandemic time. We are emerging from the river of grief and sadness and isolation. We are trying to find new ways to be and become in our world. We are hopeful that as we do re-emerge and come back together in so many different ways, that we can do so safely, respectfully, with patience and grace and peace. And as we figure out what re-emerging looks like for us at church, I'll ask the same prayers for patience and peace. But we still will have the promise, just as Jesus was given, that we are God's beloved own, in whom God is well pleased to continue to be expressed, to be known and shown and grown, to continue to bear witness to justice, to continue to bear witness to the climate crisis and the changes that will need to be made in order to live more lightly on this beloved planet, this grace and this peace. Friends, I hope that the rivers of this valley and of our larger state, our larger nation, our larger world can continue to flow through your hearts and through your minds, bringing a sense of healing and grace and peace and hope and justice and love. May peace flow like a river in your hearts. Amen.